Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. And welcome from sunny California, where I'm presenting from today. My name is Jan Elman. I'm the founder of Servoy, and with me today is Sean Devlin, one of the most senior engineers at Servoy, and he's been leading the development and release of Servoy 8.3, and as such also presenting the launch webinar series this week, which is quite exciting. I thought it was a part two, Sean, but your slide says part one. should be an interesting update today.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's I forgot to change the lead-in slide, but hopefully that's the worst part of the webinar.
Okay. And what are we going to talk about today?
So today we are going to talk about multi-tenancy. Which has been really a part of the platform since the beginning of the product. But in 8.3, we're going to make it even easier, and we've also added some performance enhancements around multi-tenancy and data broadcasting.
Cool. All right, well, let's get started. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the questions channel, or if you have suggestions or comments, then that's the place to put them in. So feel free to do that as the presentation rolls on, and we'll pick up some questions during and at the end of this session. And hopefully in the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to learn everything about multi-tenancy in Servoy 8.3.
Okay, well, as is the tradition, we're going to start with some demos, and then we'll review what we saw and how we did it. So I'm going to jump right into a demo about basic multi-tenancy, and then we'll talk a bit about advanced data filtering because we added some enhancements around filtering in general, and we'll talk a bit about performance enhancement around sort of siloing the data broadcast events. So I'm going to switch over to my browser. Is my screen visible, Jan?
Yes, I can see your browser and a nice graph here. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so what we're looking at here is actually a security management console, which comes with an extension, the security extension for Servoy. That's not really the focus here. There's a separate webinar about that. But what I wanted to show was that I have a setup here with multiple tenants, and if I jump into one of my tenants here, you can see that I have 3 users, and I'm going to show a bit about logging in with these users. And I'm going to look at another tenant here, demo, which has only 1 user, and we're going to log in with both users or both tenants, and we're going to see the multi-tenant filtering applied, and we'll also use those 3 users that I showed you here to talk about advanced filters. So I want to take a look at them. You can see that I have myself, and if I look at my roles, I have a North America role. And if I look at my colleague Jan, because he is the founder of Servoy and he's based in the US but also hails from the Netherlands, we give him 2 permissions here, Europe and North America. And we have one other user here, Juan, who is in South America. So we give him the South America role. And we're going to see that a bit later. Just sort of remember that we're going to see that a bit later in when we talk about advanced filtering. So let's switch solutions here because I'm running from developer. We can only have 1 active solution at a time. So I'm going to jump into example multi-tenancy. And so first I'm going to log in as myself, and the tenant you'll notice is Servoy. And you can see that there's an owner column on my customer records here, and we're seeing all the records from the Servoy tenant. The same is true if I go to products orders. There's the owner column there. So what I want to do is log out. I'm going to change to the demo tenant, and I'm going to log back in again. And I only have 2 records in this table for that tenant. You can see that if I were to add a new customer, just put in a little bit of information. And save it. The owner was added automatically, so that the next time when I am logging in, it's either filtered in or filtered out. So typically that's been fairly straightforward to set up, but it requires some steps. And I want to show what I did in Developer to get this effect, because now it's actually quite a bit easier. So the first thing I want to show is a new action that you can launch from Developer. If you right-click any database server, you'll see an option here, Flag Tenant Columns. And what you can do is type in the name of what column in your tables, and this is if they're named consistent across your database. I'll show you what you can do if they're not in a minute. But you put something in my case it was owner. It doesn't create the column, it just sets a flag on it. The column has to already be there. If I look at one of my tables here, and I select the owner column, basically what that does is it goes through every table, and if it has a column with that name, it applies this flag tenant. Now, you could have tables where the tenant column is different or they don't have one. So you can do that manually on each column. What that does is it just writes the flag in the DBI file, which is stored in your resources project. So that applies to all the solutions that share that resources project. Now, the next thing that you would have to do is to apply who the current tenant is. Now, I'm using an extension to help manage security and have basically it's a security database with users and tenants and groups and things like that. But in this application, if I look at the on-solution open event, what I do is I'm calling this line of code here, security.setTenantValue, and that would be located here in the security API of the Solution Explorer, and you can see it there, set tenant value. And that's basically going to be, a number, a UUID, a string, which is going to match on what's in that tenant column in those tables. And so what this does is it goes through your databases, and any tables and any databases that have that tenant flag set, it's actually applying the filter for you. So in the past, if you were doing this, you'd have to call database manager, add table filter parameter, and do it that way. This does that automatically for you, and it also sets what the auto enter value will be. So even though my owner auto enter I haven't set, it's doing it automatically. So I don't have to go through on every column and set that the auto enter is going to be some variable like current tenant. That's all done internally now. And the third thing it does is it actually limits data broadcasting within that tenant, and that's the performance enhancement I was talking about. So data broadcast events will only be pushed within client sessions that are have the same tenant value applied. So basically, I did the setup of setting the tenant flag and then calling this one line of code, and that does those 3 things. The next example that I want to show you is another feature that was added in 8.3, which is the ability to filter tables or found sets based on something more complex. So typically it was a data provider name, an operator like equals or like or greater than, and then a value, and you could apply them that way. It was traditionally difficult to do joins or logicals like ands and ors, and basically a complex kind of query, and have it set and be a persistent filter. So I'm going to use my Servoy tenant, and I'll log in as myself again. And you'll notice that if I go to my orders table, it's only showing me orders in North America because I had that North America privilege. So I see Canada, Mexico, and USA. If I search for something like Germany, I get no results. If I log out and log in as my colleague Jan, remember he had both Europe and North America. You can see that we're getting all of the, oops, that's the customer table. You can see we're getting all the European countries. So Germany is okay, USA is okay, but maybe Brazil, we still get no results. And finally, I'll log back in as my other colleague, Juan, in South America. He had the South American privilege. Something went wrong there. Oh no, it's orders. I didn't do the other table. So now you can see Brazil, Venezuela, etc. But of course, nothing in North America and nothing in Europe. Okay, so again, it's filtered, but in this case, we needed a join, and you couldn't do that with filter parameters previously. So let's take a look at the code. Now, on solution open, I'm calling this method filter orders, and down here is where I apply that advanced filter. And you can see that what I start with is a QB select object. So I create a query against the orders table. And then I'm using, again, this is part of that security extension, but that's not the point of this webinar. The point of this webinar is just how to do the filter. It could be managed some other way, but I'm basically checking if they have the North American role. Then I apply this filter, and you'll notice that I'm doing the join here, orders to customers, because I couldn't do that with the regular database manager add filter param because it doesn't let you do joins. And so then I do an OR here, and basically it builds up the privileges of those ORs, which you couldn't do ORs either with a traditional database filter parameter. So now it's really possible to get complex filters without having to do some sort of weird query stuff that you try to apply every time you run a search or something. It's really a persistent filter. The other thing is that this applies to found set filter params as well. Both are supported with the query object. Okay, and then for the third demonstration, what I'd like to show is really the data broadcasting. So I guess I'll log back in as myself with the Servoy tenant. And what I'm going to do is launch, because I'm running a developer, I can't have more than one debug client of a certain type at the same time. So I'm going to launch the classic web client. We're going to miss some of the styling. Well, I want to be in a separate tenant first. So I'm going to log in this time as the demo tenant. And you can see my 3 records here. It is filtered. But over in this client, I'm logged in as the Servoy tenant. So what I want to demonstrate is that if I make a change here, and I'm showing a dialog on data broadcast, so I'm going to update the city, say from Amsterdam to I don't know, New York, and I'm going to save that. So that record's been committed to the database. Over here, I'm not even in that tenant, so I really don't care to get a data broadcast. Nothing happened, no event was pushed. Now what I'm going to do is log out, and come back in as the demo tenant. And I'm going to come over here to, let's do demo company 2 and rename this to Los Angeles and save. And you can see over in the first client, I am showing the dialog on the data broadcast event. Because we're in the same tenant in those sessions, the data broadcast event is pushed. I'm not doing any logic to do that because we really want to limit the event for performance reasons. So we don't even have to worry about that. And you can see that this second company was updated to Los Angeles. If I show you the code for that, if we look at the solution properties for example multi-tenancy, there is an on data broadcast event handler. And all I'm doing is I was limiting it to just customers in this case, but let me make this bigger. I'm checking the data source, and if it's customers, then I show the dialog that the broadcast event happened. So I'm not checking it for the tenant or anything. That's done automatically. Okay. So let's quickly review what we saw. The first thing we did is we applied the tenant columns in the database, and you can do that by right-clicking the database connection. And if you select flag tenant columns, it'll do all columns with that name in the database. But you can see on the right-hand picture there, you can do it individually on the column level. It's just that tenant flag. Then sometime, usually on solution open, you want to apply the tenant value, and that's in the security API. And you set the tenant value, and that does three things. It applies the data filters automatically, and then it also sets the auto enter for all of those columns, and it also limits data broadcast within tenants, same tenants sessions. Then we saw the advanced filtering, and what we did there is we used the QB select object and sort of instead of a traditional database data filter parameter, and in this case we limited it based on using a join, but you can do whatever you can normally do in Query Builder. It really just copies the where clause of your query and applies it to all queries to that data source. I think that's it. Jan, do we have any questions?
There is a couple of questions coming in, yes. There's a question from Mark. I assume security.set tenant value should not be applied to a stateless web service. Now, when you insert a record through this web service for a specific tenant, will that also be broadcasted to just the users which are logged in using the security.set tenant value with that specific value?
Yeah, that's correct. Anyone who applies, who calls security set tenant value will be in a silo of broadcast events. So they only get it from within their tenant. Unless there's no tenant, then it can go across. So if you have a table that has no tenant column, then it can still broadcast to all. So if you have a shared table in multi-tenancy, that's common, and there's a change there, then that broadcast is propagated.
Okay. Question from Bob: Can we do more than one column with the tenant flag?
Yes, that is supported. So, well, wait, more than one column with the tenant flag. I think right now it's currently just one column. I have to check with R&D because you can do it. No, you can do it on multiple because you can just go in and select one and flag it. So you can have multiple flags. You just can't do it at the right click and set tenant value, because that just like you specify the column name and it goes through and applies it. So maybe an enhancement opportunity there.
All right. There's a question from Robrecht. Can we have a combination of multiple tenants? So
I assume that means can we have a tenant filter, which is, I can see company A, B, and C. And what we decided for this feature was we see a lot of different security models, and we really have to draw the line because people do it a lot of different ways, and so we went with just a strict tenant, single tenant kind of setup. Of course, you can apply filters on your own, and so this is more to do really a separation of all the data. And then if you need to do nuanced filters about, I can see 3 different companies, or like I showed you, I can only see region in North America, then you do that separately with filter params.
Okay. A question from Patrice. As we already have a more complex tenant, is there a way to only set the tenant name in the client to use the new data broadcast limitation?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't set a tenant, so I assume what you mean is you don't want to deal with the columns and the filtering, but you do want to limit data broadcast. So if you don't set the tenant value, that flag, on any of the database columns, then the filtering won't really apply to anything. But that is also a property of a stateful session. And so if you want to limit data broadcast there, then you could do that, but it's really going to look for those tables that have that value. So I don't quite know how that would work. Maybe you could create an extra column that you sort of concatenate some stuff together and you use that. I don't know.
Okay. There's a question from Imre. Does the tenant name uniqueness needs to be configured on DB column level, or is it done within Servoy? I'm not sure what the question is, but maybe you do.
Well, so there isn't a tenants table in this setup. Now I had the security extension, which does have a tenants table. That's why I was able to show you, that one console at the beginning where it showed the different tenants and the different users. But the uniqueness of a tenant isn't really in play because there is no tenants table by default. It's just a stateful session value plus some filters that you might apply. So that would be up to you if you had your own tenants table. If you use the extension that I was using here, then the uniqueness is built in.
Okay. Last question from Mark. When you flag the tenant column, is this a one-time action, or is this applied to future new columns with the same name? If not, maybe this is something to have in the developer preferences.
I see, yeah. I believe it's a one-time action. It's sort of shorthand for going into each column and making that flag. So yeah, I guess that's an opportunity for an enhancement to have a setting where you could apply it to tables as they're added. Although, it's probably not too much work to just say, okay, every time I add a table, set the, rerun that, and it'll do it for you automatically. But it could probably be automated.
All right, well, those are the questions for today. Of course, if anybody else has additional questions or questions in the future, then feel free to join the discussion on the forum. That's a great place to continue the discussion. We'll be keeping an eye on it. Make sure to download Servoy 8.3 and try it out for yourself. So if there's any issues, that you can find them in time before it goes live very soon out of release candidate. And last but not least, what is the topic for Friday, Sean?
Friday is going to be about client design mode, so customizing the user interface in the NG client.
And that happens to be my favorite feature of Servoy 8.3. I look forward to that. Thanks, Sean, for presenting, and thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.